Gretchen Carlson for being here today and inspiring a lot of the effort.
Speaking of ageless, I want to thank Senator Grassley for helping me get this thing moving. And he's had a midlife crisis. And he's going to solve it right here in front of us, and we're going to get this bill over the line.
That is regular order for sure. We turn to the votes on nominations. The first is Kevin Ritz, nominated to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'd like to briefly comment on his nomination. During the hearing, members of the committee questioned him about a complaint submitted to the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility in connection with his representation of a case. Mr. Ritz has stated that he was not aware of the complaint. In fact, he reiterated under repeated questioning by members of the committee. One member even went so far as to accuse Mr. Ritz of lying to the committee. As I mentioned yesterday, that would be a federal crime when you're under oath. No evidence was produced to suggest he was lying. In fact, this accusation was untrue, unfounded, and wholly inappropriate. Here are the facts, as Mr. Ritz explained at the hearing and as we followed up to find to be true. He did not receive notice from the Office of Professional Responsibility regarding any letter of complaint. This is presumably because OPR determined the complaint was meritless and dismissed it. As OPR itself says on its website, and I quote, "Most complaints received by OPR are determined not to warrant further review because, for example, the complaint on its face appears to be without merit or is unsupported by any evidence." This is the most important sentence. In such cases, OPR will close the matter without informing the subject attorney of the complaint. Notably, the defense attorney represented to the court during the case in question that she was not accusing Mr. Ritz of any misconduct. In fact, no allegations of misconduct against Mr. Ritz were ever substantiated. The judge in this case stated, and I quote, "The record does not reflect a determination by the court adverse in any way to Mr. Ritz. I need that to be absolutely clear," the judge said. Given these facts, the treatment of Mr. Ritz by some members of the committee was disappointing. His nomination to be U.S. Attorney was voice voted out of this committee in 2022. Notably, he enjoyed the strong support of his home state senators at the time. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Mr. Ritz's nomination?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, and I'm not going to take up the committee's time today to rehash the White House's history of not working with Senator Hagerty and I on these judicial nominees, but I do want to say this. The White House rushed through a backroom deal to put Kevin Ritz in this seat, and by so doing, they have nominated a man whose lack of professional ethics unquestionably disqualifies him from federal judicial service. And for all of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who care about indigent criminal defendants, who care about preserving criminal defendants' constitutional rights, and who care about supporting our federal public defenders, you should be very concerned by the prospect of Mr. Ritz serving as a federal judge. I know that my Democratic colleagues believe in the American ideal that every individual accused of a crime is entitled to due process of the law. But that's not how Kevin Ritz operates as a prosecutor. Mr. Ritz uses bait-and-switch tactics to trick indigent criminal defendants into accepting plea deals they didn't agree to. He leaves his written plea agreements intentionally vague, lures indigent criminal defendants and public defenders into an oral agreement, and then pulls the rug out from under them in court. And when a female defense attorney finally called Mr. Ritz out on his unethical conduct, he tried to defame and discredit her. In fact, Mr. Ritz was removed from that case because of his unethical behavior. The prosecutor who replaced him went so far as to say on the record that the allegations of Mr. Ritz's professional conduct, and I quote, are serious and are taken so seriously by our office that Mr. Ritz will be taken off the case, end quote. And this wasn't just one case. Mr. Ritz's reputation for unethical behavior is well known across the Tennessee bar. Just ask Stephen Shankman, the former federal public defender for the Western District of Tennessee. Mr. Ritz's ethical misdeeds are so well known that when Mr. Shankman first heard reports of a prosecutor behaving unethically, he knew it had to be Kevin Ritz. In an email warning other defense attorneys about Mr. Ritz, Mr. Shankman said, and I quote, "This is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred, but everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware, your clients should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution," end quote. You should proceed with extreme caution. I'd like my colleagues across the aisle to think about that one. Is that how you want indigent criminal defendants and public defenders to feel when they enter an American courtroom and Mr. Ritz is the presiding judge? I would hope you do not want that. Mr. Ritz has a history, unfortunately, of lying to the federal courts, lying to federal public defenders, and lying to indigent criminal defendants. And during his confirmation hearing, Mr. Ritz lied to the committee. Mr. Chairman, I do not believe that Mr. Ritz has the judgment or professional ethics to be a federal judge. It is deeply, deeply disappointing to me. We had asked to work with the White House. We know what has transpired here, and I hope my colleagues across the aisle who are concerned about unethical federal prosecutors trampling on defendants' constitutional rights will join me in opposing this nomination.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Before recognizing Senator Tillis, I would like to make this point. The committee has received many letters of support for Ritz's nomination, including members of the defense bar in Tennessee. I want my colleagues to listen to this one sentence. One letter from the federal defender of the Western District of Tennessee said of Mr. Ritz, I quote, "a fair person of integrity," and notice his, quote, "perfect temperament to serve as a judicial officer." That comes from the federal defender in Western District of Tennessee. Another letter from a criminal defense attorney who served as opposing counsel in cases with Ritz described him as, quote, "intelligent, honest, hardworking, and fair." Before we make allegations of any witness before us lying to this committee, recall that they are under oath and that would involve possible criminal action. I would be very careful in using that term myself. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.